기자부대 Hamon the beat!
Welcome back to another episode of Debunking Araki Forgot, where I go over any of your JoJo plot hole related questions. It's been quite some time since the last video, but with the recent announcement of the Steel Ball Run anime adaptation, I've started to see a lot more discussion around JoJo and a renewed interest in the series. And thanks to the long hiatus, I've also had time to put together a big list of topics. So let's get right into them. Our first topic comes from part 2 about how Santana learned to speak. The comment says that when Santana first appears, he speaks slowly since he was just learning English for the first time, while the other Pillar Men speak English perfectly right away. They then ask why Santana would allow Stroheim to name him and how Cars later refers to him as Santana anyway. Well, to start off, it is demonstrated that the other Pillar Men are far more advanced than Santana, to the point that Cars said he was more like a pet to them than a peer. Something that should be noted though is that while hibernating, Wemu at the very least was able to hear what was going on before he fully awakened, since he tells Cars about it after they all wake up. The fact that they had a head start on hearing modern language and the fact that time passes before Joseph and Caesar arrive gives plenty of time to get to a normal level of speech. And you can notice that when Wemu first wakes up, the Nazis actually say he's speaking Latin, so he may not have fully learned modern language at that point. As for Santana allowing himself to be named, I just don't get the question since he doesn't really have any control over what Stroheim decides to name him. The last topic is actually one I've covered before with how Cars became aware of Santana's name. Wemu tells Cars that he heard the humans talking about what happened in Mexico, so he would have heard Santana's new name here. Notably, he doesn't directly mention Santana, and it is just included in parentheses for the reader to understand that's what he's talking about. Later, when Cars fought Stroheim, Stroheim brings up Santana to compare his own strength to him. And since Cars already knows Santana's name, there's no problem with him using it here. For another Santana question, this one asks how Santana didn't know about Hamon, since we see that Santana is surprised and learns about Hamon for the first time when he meets Joseph, while the other Pillar Men already know about it from fighting Hamon users in the past. This also has to do with Santana being abandoned by the others. The Pillar Men originated in South or Central America, and their existence there is behind the stone mask eventually making its way to the Aztecs. Cars, SEDC, and Wemu traveled to the east, leaving Santana behind, who they viewed as too weak. It's only there that they met the Hamon clan and became familiar with the ability. What's more, the Pillar Men were under the impression that they had wiped out all the Hamon users before their hibernation, meaning they couldn't have known of any back on the other continent. For another Pillar Man question, one asks why the Pillar Men went into hibernation instead of continuing to search for the Red Stone when there was no guarantee it would reappear after 2,000 years. The answer to this is that it's communicated in the story that the hibernation was a necessity. According to this page, after Santana's defeat, it was said that he slept so long because he had used too much power. So the same would be true for the other Pillar Men who would have just used a lot of power to wipe out the Hamon clan. Next is a comment relating to the scene when SEDC's brain possesses Suzy Q. This person says that we see Suzy Q put a package on a boat leaving the island and then head up to Lisa's room to take the Red Stone. This is a clear contradiction since it shouldn't be possible for SEDC to have mailed the stone before taking it. Well, this is a simple one since this person's understanding of the order of events is completely wrong. We see that after Lisa took off the Red Stone and placed it on the table, Suzy walked out into the hallway where she met Joseph, and the brain transferred to her. After this, a short amount of time passes when Joseph sees Suzy on the docks handing over a package. Immediately after this, he peeks at Lisa when he suddenly sees Suzy back in the room, and here it's revealed that the stone is already missing. So it's clear that the stone was already gone by the time the package was sent. The real question here is how Suzy got the stone, and there's a few possibilities. We see Suzy make a seemingly impossible jump from the docks to the room, showing us that with SEDC possessing her, Suzy has increased speed to have been able to steal the stone undetected. Joseph also comments on the doorknob being covered in slime, implying Suzy with the brain entered the room through the door at some point. So what I think happened was that after Joseph was told to wait half an hour for Lisa's bath, Suzy re-entered through the door and stole the stone undetected, then went down to send the package, and then climbed back up with her increased speed to the open balcony where Joseph sees her. Moving on to part 3, this one asks why when Dio first met Avdol, he didn't use the world's time stop to catch up with him and recruit him with a flesh bud. The answer to this is really that Avdol just lucked out. He happened to be near a window to jump out of and was familiar with the streets outside to be able to get away. Now, I have no doubt that if Dio really tried, he could have caught Avdol or even snuck up on him and implanted the bud without him realizing. However, I think that would be out of Dio's character. When he met Avdol, he said that he heard he had an ability and wanted a demonstration, and instead of taking people by force, Dio prefers to make them aware of their fealty to him, whether it's through fear or attraction. It's just part of the sick, narcissistic nature of Dio's personality. Dio is well aware of how strong he is, so Avdol getting away is really not that big of a deal to him. Other stand users will simply be drawn to him. Also, Dio is seemingly pretty secretive with his stand ability since only a select few of his minions even know about the world's powers, including Whole Horse who only got a glimpse of the power, so I don't think he would use it right in front of Avdol. This next one I've seen discussed a lot over the years. After the fight with Tower of Grey that resulted in a plane crash, the group decided to use slower methods to reach Egypt. However, many ask why they didn't just try flying a plane again, but this time with a private jet from the Speedwagon Foundation. While this is a decent suggestion to make since it avoids the potential casualties of a normal plane crash, I still think they avoided this route for how unnecessarily dangerous it is. While on board the plane, Joseph realizes that Dio is sensing their movement somehow, which we see is thanks to his use of Jonathan's stand, and they know that Dio will continue sending stand users after them. If Dio is able to predict that they'll take a flight, even with it being a private plane, that opens it up to being sabotaged. Later in the Endul fight, we saw that a Speedwagon Foundation helicopter was able to be taken out, so the possibility of a remote stand tampering with a plane is a real danger, and the odds of them managing to survive another full-on plane crash is fairly unlikely. Whereas on foot, they at least have a chance to engage in a real stand battle without having to worry about destroying the plane around them and dooming themselves. Funnily enough, we actually see exactly this scenario play out in the OVA adaptation of Part 3. Here, there is no Tower of Grey fight, and the group board a private plane to travel straight to Egypt, but it's revealed that the flight was sabotaged by Polnareff, and they crash into the ocean where they get picked up by Strength. This next comment mentions the fact that Darby was aware of Dio's stand ability and asks why the Crusaders didn't take the opportunity to learn this from Darby after he woke up, with one method for doing this being mind reading, which was said to be possible with Hermit Purple. Now this is another really simple one since Darby is clearly not in a state where this can happen. For one, the comment seems to think that Darby just passed out, but he's actually conscious when we last see him, where he is shown to be completely mentally broken from the game and releases all of his trapped souls. To cap it all off, Avdol directly comments that Darby has gone insane and can no longer be interrogated about Dio. This next comment asks how Jotaro and Dio are able to breathe while in time stop. I feel like this is an example of something that happens with a lot of these questions, which is a case of overthinking the abilities. I assume the idea here is that with time being frozen, all of the air is frozen and therefore the character shouldn't be able to breathe. But we see pretty clearly that people who can move in time stop are capable of affecting other objects that have been stopped. And really, if you think about it, if that weren't true, the characters themselves would be frozen in place by the air around them. So I think it's clear that if they breathe, the stopped air would move and still enter their lungs. However, there's really no point in talking about any of this since the question itself has no bearing on anything. Since the time stops we see in the manga only last about 10 seconds or less, there's never any time that a person would need to breathe during a time stop. Moving on to part 4, this person asks how Masazo Kinoto was able to survive for so long while having Cheap Trick, since there's no way Kinoto could go from birth without anyone seeing his back. The explanation behind this comes from when exactly Kinoto got his stand. Remember that Kinoto was one of the stand users that was shot by Yoshihiro Kira, so his stand ability is actually fairly recent. According to Cheap Trick, Kinoto was not strong enough to be a real stand user. Cheap Trick then started whispering to him, which is actually what created the back phobia in the first place, so we can see that Kinoto's phobia is relatively recent, which is why it makes sense that he was able to survive up until meeting Rohan. Now we have one for the end of part 4, when Josuke steals Joseph's wallet. This comment asks how Josuke was able to take the wallet by fixing the photograph. Since the wallet and photo are two separate objects, only the photo should have been pulled back, not the entire wallet. The reason something like this is possible is because Crazy Diamond's fixing is fairly linear. While fixing the photo, it isn't going to make any complex movements to maneuver itself out of the wallet. It'll move pretty much in a straight line from Joseph to Josuke. Now, I know most JoJo fans are too broke to know this, but when a wallet has a lot in it, it's harder to pull something out. Joseph, of course, is rich, and we can see a huge wad of money inside the wallet. So with the wallet being full and the photo snugly held inside, it requires some more force to remove the photo, which causes the whole wallet to get pulled over alongside it. Our next question is for part 5, and asks why the currency used by Giorno is lira, when by 2001, when the story takes place, the lira had been replaced with the euro. For this one, I think JoJo fans just have no idea how old this manga is, since Part 5's manga started publishing in 1995 while the lira was still in use. For another, someone asks how it's possible that Giorno turned one of Pulpo's guns into a banana, when Gold Experience has to touch an object to transform it and Giorno was outside the cell. However, I feel like this was made very clear just by looking at the scene itself. Obviously, Giorno being outside the cell doesn't matter when his stand can simply move on its own and phase through into the cell. We also directly see Giorno holding out his hand toward the closed fridge, while Pulpo's busy drinking wine. When Pulpo looks back at him, Giorno is walking away, and we can see that the fridge door is now open. So clearly Gold Experience just entered the cell, opened the fridge, grabbed one of Pulpo's guns which is right next to it, and placed it inside. We can even see the revolver missing before and after Giorno acted, which is the same gun that later appears in Pulpo's mouth. The next question says that in Part 5, it was said that damaging a long-range stand doesn't damage the user, as seen with Black Sabbath. However, when the long-range stand Clash was attacked, that damage transferred to Squallow. The misunderstanding here is that the rule has never been that long-range stands don't transfer damage. It's long-range automatic stands that don't. There have been tons of long-range stands throughout the series, like Hierophant Green, Lovers, or Sex Pistols, who we see share damage with their users. However, when it comes to long-range automatic stands like Sheer Heart Attack or Black Sabbath, who act on their own and aren't controlled by their users, those are the ones that do not transfer damage. This next question relates to Sleeping Slaves, the final arc of Part 5. They point out that the stand Rolling Stone showed that Bucciarati was fated to die, which we later saw happen in his fight with King Crimson. However, when the stand is destroyed and Bucciarati's early death is avoided, the stone then changes to show that Narancia, Abbacchio, and Bucciarati will now die as well. However, if Bucciarati died to Rolling Stone, Giorno would have never joined Passione and killed Pulpo, which is what led Bucciarati and the others being sent on that mission to protect Trish that resulted in the original death. So the question asks, what was Bucciarati's original death that was averted here? This one is a bit complicated, so it's understandable that there's some confusion. The way Rolling Stone works is that it approaches someone who is going to die in the future, and by touching the stone, they can accept their fate and die early. This actually brings up an interesting question when it comes to fate though, since if the entire world is bound by fate, it should seemingly also be fated for a person to touch the stone, meaning the stone itself is now their fated cause of death. I believe this is why the stone only shows Bucciarati at first. We know that without the stone being involved at all, Bucciarati is fated to meet Giorno for the events of Part 5 to play out afterwards. However, with the stone, Bucciarati is now fated to die when he is touched by it, and if he does die here, the rest of the story won't happen, so the stone only shows Bucciarati, because he's the target of the stand, and if the current chain of events continues, only Bucciarati will die. However, Mista's resolve overcomes fate and he's able to change the future by destroying the stone. Since the original fate is now set back into place, this is why the stone now shows the others will die too. For Part 6, I got a comment asking about Foo Fighters. Here they ask why Foo Fighters is able to see and interact with stands when they don't have one and they're really just plankton with intelligence. I don't know where this idea came from, since Foo Fighters is indisputably a stand user. The entire reason Foo Fighters' intellect formed is because Pucci gave a stand disc to the plankton, so Foo Fighters themselves is a kind of shared stand with the entire colony, and so they obviously would be able to interact with stands. They also point out how when Pucci gives FF the boiling water stand, no stand is removed beforehand, which would indicate that FF has no stand. However, as I've gone over before, this is not how stand discs work. We have seen that when you already have a stand and then insert a disc, it does not replace the stand, but just allows you to use the ability for a short time before being ejected, as seen with Jolene and Star Platinum. For the next comment, this person asks how it's possible for Weather Report to have been affected by Bohemian Rhapsody, since you have to identify with a character to be affected and Weather has no memories. What this person seems to forget is that even though Weather's memories of his past are removed, he still accumulates memories in the present. The prisoners are shown to have access to things like books and movies, so Weather would have easily been capable of seeing a picture of Van Gogh's work somewhere, which would allow him to be affected by Van Gogh later. Next, I've gotten some comments saying that Emporio's stand was forgotten about and didn't see any use after leaving the prison. However, this is not true. First of all, we need to remember that the ghost room itself is not tied to Emporio, it's tied to the prison and can only be accessed from certain places inside of it. So they can't just enter the room anytime they want. Emporio's ability is not just to access the room, since ghost locations are an independent phenomenon that has existed in JoJo before, such as the Ghost Alley in Part 4 and the Ghost House Kira finds in Dead Man's Questions. Both places also similarly appear through the gaps between real locations. What Emporio's ability does is let him make use of the ghost objects he finds in the room, which we see he can bring with him and store on his body. And he continued using these items after they leave the prison. These include the ghost gun, the computer, the lighter, and a tiny book bag that's able to store the items. For another question, we have one I've seen people say a lot. Some people claim that since Jolene was a delinquent, she shouldn't be able to know what a Mobius strip was to be able to use that knowledge in the Sea Moon fight. I've really never understood this complaint, but it really is surprisingly common, with some people even citing this moment as one of their biggest issues in the part. This just doesn't make any sense to me, since Jolene being a delinquent does not at all disqualify her from knowing what a Mobius strip is, since it's a pretty universally known concept that even non-educated people would probably know about. I doubt that all the people making this complaint, or even most JoJo fans in general, have a super high level of education, but despite that they still know what a Mobius strip is, at least in theory. But really, the idea that Jolene is unlikely to know this is completely flawed, since Jolene is not a delinquent at the start of Part 6. It was said that Jolene was a delinquent in the past and was connected to a biker gang, but it was made very clear that she was leaving that behind and hid her past from Romeo. There were also direct references made to Jolene's education in the very first chapter. Jolene herself says that she has been going to school and that her teachers are telling her to take her college exams. And it was directly mentioned that Jolene was given some of her schoolwork when she was in jail. So really, the claim that Jolene is uneducated is based on nothing. For another Sea Moon related question, one I've seen a lot ever since the anime came out asks what the force field-like ability used by Pucci in this fight is supposed to be. We see when Jolene tries to punch Pucci, her attacks seem to be deflected for a bit. Now, this does make sense to be confused about since this flourish was something added by the anime. What I believe this is supposed to be is simply the effects of Pucci being the center of gravity, so Jolene and her attacks are pushed back. In the manga version of this scene, we see Jolene punch towards Pucci, then react in shock, and the next page shows Jolene floating upwards. I think without the small gaps in time between panels and pages, this could be hard to portray in motion, so I believe the anime slightly changed it here to make the scene more clear. This next comment says that since Made in Heaven has infinite speed, that would just be equal to instant teleportation, and so Pucci should have just been able to defeat the protagonists easily. This is a bit of a misunderstanding of the ability. Made in Heaven does not have infinite speed per se. It has the ability to accelerate itself and the world around it at a rate that increases towards infinity, so it isn't super fast right away, it gradually builds up speed. This is why Pucci got more dangerous as the fight went on, but this limitation is also why they were able to hold out that long for Emporio to escape. This next one comes from Steel Ball Run. This person points out that during Johnny's backstory, they are shown in line for a Dorothy Parker play. However, Dorothy Parker was not born until 1893, which would have been years later. There's a clear misunderstanding here. While it's true the real Dorothy Parker was not born yet, this is not meant to be the real Dorothy Parker. Johnny's girlfriend says that Dorothy Parker is an actress in the play. However, the real Parker was not an actress, but a writer. So in the manga, this is an entirely separate fictional actress who was named by Araki after the real Dorothy Parker. Another comment asks why Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap is abbreviated as D4C by Valentine when the characters are canonically speaking Japanese, with English words separate from Japanese such as stand names. So they question why someone speaking Japanese would know the English number 4, especially in 1890. Now, every once in a while for these videos, I like to include some of the really ridiculous questions, and that's the case here since I really have no idea what this person is talking about. I've actually seen this sentiment before with people questioning what language is being spoken in JoJo, especially when it comes to characters of different cultures interacting. Really, the answer is that it doesn't really matter for the story, and we can simply assume the characters all happen to speak one language, like English. And this is a very common idea with countless movies and shows that depict other countries letting characters speak our language for the sake of the audience, while if you were to really think about it canonically, they're speaking another language. So for that reason, it's pretty obvious that the characters in Part 7 are speaking English and not Japanese. This comment is even stranger than that though, since it says that stand names are different and are being translated to the reader, but apparently not the rest of the dialogue. But they seem to forget that this is a Japanese manga and the intended reader is Japanese to begin with. And in the original Japanese, the names are still in English. They also seem to be completely ignorant to the fact that a big portion of Japanese speech is made up of loan words, and you will frequently find English words being used like normal. They also have this weird idea that the time period has something to do with this, as if Japan were still isolationist in 1890, when really the Japanese had already had a relation with the US since the 1850s, and Steel Ball Run even features a Japanese character. For the last Part 7 one, this comment questions a moment from the end of the fight between Valentine and Diego. After the two fall out of the train, Valentine somehow gets caught between two objects to travel to another world while dragging Diego under the train to his death. However, the comment says that it was never shown what objects Valentine got between, and that this wasn't properly explained. I disagree. After the two fall out of the train, Diego tries to keep Valentine from having anything to fit between, and swipes away the falling pieces of glass that Valentine was planning to use. Once Diego attacks Valentine though, we are shown a close-up of his hair moving near the train track. Valentine then grabs Diego with his legs, pulling him towards the train. Then we clearly see Valentine's hair being pulled and his head going underneath the wheels of the train. This is what allowed him to shift to another world by putting himself in the path of the train's wheels. And moments later, this is confirmed by Johnny, who witnessed the fight through a pair of binoculars. Here he directly states that Valentine caught himself under the train's wheel to disappear into another world. For Jojolian, this one asks why the Higashikata curse didn't end when the rock disease was passed from Jobin to his bully, when this was done using the same process that removed it from Tsurugi. I think the pretty clear answer here is that it has to do with the fruit itself. The Higashikata family has used the walleyes to redirect the curse for some time. However, as we see from Kei's demonstration of the walleye's power, it results in a mixture of two objects rather than a one-way transmission. So while I believe that the walleyes can redirect the symptoms of the rock disease, some part of the curse itself still remains. It's only through the fruit, which purely moves things from one person to another, that the curse can be removed. As for why this fruit in particular is special, I'd say it has to do with the fruit's one-of-a-kind origin, which the characters repeatedly refer to. The walleyes were created through Johnny's actions, leaving behind some kind of power from the saint's corpse. Then the Rokakako was grafted above it, which is what altered the fruit's normal power of exchange. This new fruit and Josuke's creation around the same time are said to have only come about through a series of overlapping coincidences as a kind of divine intervention. So like how Josuke's creation and the rising of the walleyes are said to be the positive counterbalance to the negative forces of the rock humans and Calamity, the same is true for the new Rokakaka as a means to counter the family's curse. And that's everything I have to go over today. With my schedule slowing down lately, I wanted to get back to some of my major video series, and I think I was able to put together a pretty good number of topics here. If you have an Araki Forgot question you want answered, you can comment it down below. I'd also like to hear what kinds of standalone videos you might want to see in the future. With the Steel Ball Run anime coming relatively soon, I'm looking forward to writing some more videos, and I'm open to whatever your ideas might be. If you want to stay updated on future videos, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. You can also join the Hamon Discord to get notified on new uploads and JoJo news. Finally, I'd appreciate if you help support the channel on Patreon or by becoming a YouTube member. All supporters get their names featured at the end of the video and can submit viewer questions. This video's question comes from Arios. They ask, what are my thoughts on the Castlevania games, since they often reference JoJo itself? I would say I'm absolutely a fan of the series, with Symphony of the Night being one of my favorite games. However, I also haven't played too much beyond that. I've gone through the first, third, and fourth games as well as Rondo of Blood. I also tried a couple of the later GBA titles, but ultimately didn't get into them. I do want to get back to it though, and I'm particularly interested in trying the PS2 games. I also watched some of the Castlevania animated show when it was new for the first couple seasons, but I sort of lost interest after that. If you want to submit a patron question, you can leave them on Patreon by going to the community chat, which you'll find on the left side. On YouTube, you can also leave them in the members-only community post. I try to answer one question for each of my major videos, so feel free to leave as many as you want. Thank you for watching. This is the part of the video where I thank my $5 and up patrons. Thank you to Doorbell, Crayon, RigoVids, Zucato, Pumpkin Doge, Marrow, Sponge Cake, Cakext, Feliciano Rabaja, Rayana Meme, Christian McDonough, Pulse Dog, Zach Greenfield, Rob Goliath, Jacob Smith, Big T, Gold, Red Hot Mayonnaise, Zenkai, Royal Slush, Keenan, Perry, Cho Henshin, Saint Bobo, John Garcia, Crankenplank, Puffin32, Fran Studios, Shin Megami Tensei Film Reviews, Griffiono, Fiddlehead, Justice, Edwarg, Joao Marchand, Danilo K, Star the Gunslinger, and Mel.